Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first ever swimming parents support live stream from Propulsion Swimming and AP. I'm your host, Scott, and with me is my good friend from Propulsion Swimming, Dan, and Kevin Pickard from AP Race Clinics. Today's live stream is going to be a Q&A with Kev. Me and Dan are going to facilitate the conversations that you bring up in the chat. We've had some questions beforehand that we're going to go through as well. And essentially, we are basically going to try and support you guys with a new live stream series.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this, actually. We saw this station, didn't we, when we went to AP Race Clinics down in Bath. And that was the first station we went to. We were super interested to see what Kev was going to say about the parent supports, because we firmly believe that parents don't get the supports. There's the lack of resources. And we think this is a very unique opportunity to speak to Kev and get his wisdom out there. And everyone's chance to ask any questions about their swimmer's journey, I suppose. So I'm actually really excited about this.
Yeah, super excited. Can't wait to get into the conversation.
Okay, so a little bit of background about myself and Dan, if you aren't aware of Propulsion Swimming to start with. We launched Propulsion Swimming about 2 years ago now because we saw almost a gap in the market. There wasn't enough exposure for British swimming. There wasn't really a platform out there that is talking about it much. So we launched Propulsion Swimming as a YouTube channel. We put out videos of drills, tutorials, all sorts of topics around the pool. We have a podcast. I dropped out of swimming at the age of 16 because of, well, many different reasons. A little bit about my journey with a coach, but mainly because I decided to concentrate on my studies and education, whereas Dan took his career a little bit further, but we're both now back.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. I mean, you stopped at 16, 17, didn't you, for your studies? And I carried on through the elite sort of stage, if you like. I went to Cardiff for 2 years and actually ended up dropping out because of appendicitis. I had appendix surgery, which ultimately wiped me out, which was a shame because I was hoping to qualify for Commonwealth Games or something along those lines. So I suppose if anyone has any questions about injuries or surgeries or, you know, the mindset of that sort of stuff or what it takes to be an elite swimmer, and I'm sure Kev will jump in as well because he deals with Peaty all the time. So there's different experiences all from three of us.
Yeah, so Kev, a little bit of background about what you do at the AP Race Clinics would be great for everyone to start with.
Yeah, so it's been an evolving thing, and I think, you know, all of us have had a very challenging 18 months, what now it's coming up to 2 years. And I think the clinics certainly evolved through that time. You know, we had a lot planned for 2020, and then the Olympics got moved forwards and everything else. So we got to a point where actually we got a run in this summer, and thankfully restrictions lifted enough for us to get out there and see people. And it was the interesting thing for me was kind of what you mentioned there, the lack of support that parents get, but also the range of parents that we saw across the country. So, you know, we saw over 380 clubs and close to 2,000 parents in 10 days, which was a really good, I guess, flavour and overview of what's going on across the whole country because we did travel around the whole of the UK. So I think in terms of what we do now, we're very much trying to actually speak to our swimming community and listen to what they're saying. So parents, we're doing stuff with coaches, we're working with athletes, and actually just finding out what's the need. And kind of like you mentioned about starting the podcast series, the view is actually we want to get to the point where the community of swimming feels more supported. It doesn't matter whether you're a coach, a parent, a swimmer, or just somebody who's a fan. Actually, you want to feel like you're engaged more with your sport. And that certainly as a brand and as a team, what we're looking to do.
Yeah, definitely. So over the course of this live stream, if you have any questions you want to direct to any of us, we invite you to throw them into the chat. We can bring them up onto the live stream so everyone can see. We can answer different topics. We'll see where this goes. We're excited to, I don't know, cover a wide variety in this first kind of launch live stream. To start with, though, Kev, I've got a question for you. Okay. Why is it so important that we do support parents, and why are they important to swimmers' journeys?
I think even if we take the word swimming out of it, if you look at the sporting journey as a whole up to the age of 17, 18, where young people get more independence, ultimately that early part of their journey from, 7, 8, 9, 10, whenever it is they join a sports team, is facilitated by their parents. And they are the drivers, and often parents call it, they're the taxi drivers, they're the nutritionists, they're the psychologists, they're the, they're emotional support. They deal with so much challenges, so many challenges. And actually, it's almost, the example I give is a desert plane. They feel like they're just looking around and there's nothing there. And if you Google what should I be doing with my swimmers, you could get anything from type of training that's going on in America with senior elite athletes all the way through to a local community learn to swim program and everything in between. So it can feel quite confusing, I think, being out there. So we're just trying to get to a point where actually it doesn't matter what level you're at, what age your swimmers are, what performance level they're at. Actually, they feel like there's some guidance and support to make the journey easier, because ultimately it shouldn't be a battle. I'm like yourselves, swam all the way through my life for the last 25 plus years. I can already see a comment that's come in about someone's watching the stream from a car park before Arena League. As soon as I finish with you guys, I'm in the car and I'm off to Arena League as well. And I think that journey is something that ultimately people should get support on. And as I said earlier, it doesn't matter whether you're the coach, the parent, or the swimmer. You should feel supported and have a good experience of this journey, because it is a journey. And for some people, that carries on for the rest of their lives. So we're very much about actually trying to make sure that parents feel like when they're starting the journey in the middle of it, or they're coming towards that transition where swimmers kind of fly the nest, so to speak, they actually feel like they've got the support that they need.
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about on the channel about the swimmer's triangle. So you got the swimmer at one point, and then you get the parents at the other point, and then you got the coaches at the other point. And if one of those points falter in any sort of way, then the swimmer's career just doesn't seem to lift off or fire as much as it should. And the whole idea of this is to give parents a platform, basically, to discuss amongst themselves, discuss with us, ask questions, fire away, and learn everything about the swimmer's journey that they should do, really. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. When that triangle works in unison, that is when you get the best outcome for any, not even just the swimmer, for the parent, there's a better outcome as well when it's all working together. Now, like I said at the top of this live stream, we had some questions submitted to us beforehand. So we're going to kick things off by going through those. And then, like I said, if you've got any points you want to further on those questions, or you've got any of your own, put them in the live chat and we will get to them and I will bring them up. So to start with, our first question was, how many times a week should a 14-year-old be swimming? It's a broad question, Kev, to start with.
That's fine. So it's a great question. And I think there's loads of parents out there that have got a teenager sitting in front of them and saying, how much should they be doing? How much is too much? Are they doing enough? Et cetera, et cetera. And I think the first thing is that every single child, regardless of their age, is different. So what works for a 14-year-old Adam Peaty, who might have been swimming 2 or 3 times a week at that age, might be completely different to somebody who's an earlier developer and has been in the sport for 5 years by that point. So you get some people that might transition into a club at 7 years old. So by the time they've got to 14, they've gone through 5 or 6 groups in the club. They've got a really good background of all the different strokes. They're technically proficient. They might have started doing some land training as well around like fundamental movement patterns. And actually what is appropriate for that 14-year-old might be really different to a swimmer who at 13 decides that they've done a couple of sessions a week and actually they then want to start taking it a little bit more seriously. So the thing I say to everyone when they ask the specific age questions, whether it's in the pool or on land, the question to ask yourself is, where are we and what is our history leading up to this point? Because as long as it's progressive, the example I give from Learn to Swim is if a kid goes into a 3 1-hour-a-week group within a club and they've come out of a half-hour Learn to Swim lesson, they have suddenly done a 6-fold increase in their training. You're never then going to go from 3 hours a week to 18 hours a week in one swift movement. It's going to be a progressive journey. So I think it's actually just saying, is it progressive? Is it meeting their needs? Are they happy? And does it work for you as a family? Because ultimately, it's all well and good us saying they should be doing 1 session a week or 5 or 10 sessions a week. But actually, as a family, does it fit into your work commitments as parents? Does it fit into their school commitments? Siblings? We're assuming that it's all about with one swimmer, and very often it isn't. Adam gives a lovely example that he's the youngest of 4. Okay, so you've got parents trying to spin plates for 4 children whilst dealing with a swimmer that's obviously getting some really good traction as he moves through his teenage years. So I think it's a very broad question. And what I would say to people is look at where you are, look at the history leading up to that point, and then actually look at what comes next naturally. So there's always going to be transitions, whether that's with school. There might be work transitions, especially as they get a little bit older. 14, 15, they might then start thinking about college. Therefore, they're going to be traveling somewhere completely opposite to the pool, or are they going to be closer to the pool, and could they do more training? So I think it's actually looking at it in a really holistic way, specific to the individual, and not just saying all 14-year-olds should be doing a certain amount.
Now, there was a little follow-up question alongside that, which was, should a 14-year-old be doing gym work? And if so, how much and what kind of gym exercises would you recommend them doing?
Okay, so it's a similar answer, but ultimately as well with land, kids, certainly from my generation, we learned fundamental movement patterns by going out and playing and doing all these other sports and climbing trees and stuff like that. So I think your physiology will have started developing on land perhaps a little bit earlier than perhaps the current crop. It obviously depends on everyone's individual situation. So I think, again, it's looking at what's the base. One of the things that we talk about when we do AP Plus stuff, the first thing we talk about is how to hold a basic streamline. So the land work is teaching someone how to do a streamline. It's not about lifting weights or anything like that. We're looking at absolute basics and saying, right, can you do the basics really well? Because if you can't, there's no point in starting to add more layers to it, because at some point you're going to have to come and fix the foundations. So I think, again, it comes back to what is their land work foundations? Have they done any land-based exercise before? Do they have any weaknesses? If you go to a sports physio, they'll be able to say to you, they're strong here or they're weak here, et cetera, et cetera. We would recommend they do X, Y, and Z. So I think, again, it's looking at that individual, because, pre working in this role and a couple of roles before that, worked out of a university, and actually they had a performance centre there where there was a hub of athletes from other sports, and I saw 9-year-olds doing S&C for golf and tennis and stuff like that, but it was perfectly manageable S&C relative to their age. So it might have been somebody throwing them a tennis ball and them twisting to catch it. That's still conditioning their body relative to their sporting needs. So I think it's looking at the individual and looking at their history leading up to that point.
Yeah, I'm trying to compare what I used to be when I was 14. I think I started doing land training at 14. I think I was in the pool maybe 7 times a week, roughly, only because I've been in club swimming when I was 7. So I've progressed through that way, and then just started doing land training at 14. But it wasn't weights. It was nothing to do with weights. It was literally just core and stretching. I think that's all I would do. Would you recommend weights at that age? I think that's a bit too early.
I think it's a very individual question. And I think if we go back to some very unusual examples, if you like, so if we take some of the females that have burst onto the international scene at 15, so Katie Ledecky won Olympic gold when she was 15, Ruta Melatite did the same thing. So actually, they were probably doing very different elite style training, because actually physiologically they were nearly fully grown women by that point. Whereas equally, you might have somebody like a Ben Proud who came through quite late as a teenager. And actually, if you look at his physiology, I remember watching him race at the national age groups as a 17-year-old, national age group and youth champs as it used to be. And then seeing him a couple of years later and thinking, wow, look at how much your physiology has changed. And he started doing weights further down the line. So I think, again, it's different for everyone. I know Chad Leclos went through a whole period of not doing any weights at all and just doing medicine ball work. So really, it's that individual stuff and what their needs are, but also making sure it's progressive. And I think too often people think you need to throw everything at people too young, and you really don't, because if at 16, 17 or 18, they decide they want to take swimming even more seriously and do it up to a higher level, they might end up going off to a performance club or a senior university program. And they say, well, what are you doing? And they say, well, I'm doing 10 sessions a week, 3 weight sessions a week. I've got a nutritionist and a psychologist. And you go, well, what else can we give you? So it's thinking along those sorts of lines.
Yeah, and if I remember back to the AP race clinics that we attended, you gave a really good example of the way Duncan Scott progressed through his swimming career. So when he was 15, he actually was doing tennis at the same time. So people can look at how other sports can help develop their swimmers in the pool as well. It's not all about specifying down just to swimming at that point.
And it's also as well what the individual wants to do, because we can all look at it from an observer and go, oh, well, they should be doing this or they should be doing that. But I remember listening to a story about Caleb Dressel in his teenage years, and he said to his mum, I want to go and play American football. And he just stopped swimming and played American football for a season, decided to then come back to swimming, but that was his choice to do it. And I think too often we can get caught up in this, we should all be doing this or we should all be doing that. And I'm like, have you actually asked the swimmer what they want to do? And I did that a few years ago. I used to coach full time and had a whiteboard up on the wall. And I said, right, any point over the next 2-hour session, you can get out and write on the board 2 or 3 words to describe why you swim. I listed them all out at the end and I sent it on to the parents on an email and said, these are the reasons your kids swim. Have you ever actually asked them that? And it really did change perceptions when they're talking about having fun, seeing their teammates, keeping fit and healthy. The health and fitness awareness that these youngsters have now is brilliant. It's really, really positive. But if we're focusing on performance and kids are actually focusing on just keeping fit and healthy, you can end up pushing them out of the sport, which stops them engaging in something that is going to keep them fit and healthy for life.
I feel like crossover sports is actually quite key. If you go back to Duncan again, he's so good at freestyle, but of course freestyle's got a lot of rotation in. And of course with tennis, the tennis action is that torso rotation. So I wonder if that's actually helps. The tennis background that he had has actually helped him in his freestyle. So maybe taking a year out to do a different sport might be beneficial. I don't know.
I think one thing I always say when parents ask about other sports is, so what do your kids want to do? And I think ultimately, when we're talking about doing other sports, whatever level your swimmers are at, it's improving their physical literacy. You know, I did an interview last year with a professional snowboarder, and she dovetails it with gymnastics because her acrobatics in the air work very well with the acrobatics she does on land. But actually, she did acrobatics and gymnastics since she was a kid. And then she just linked the two together. So I think it's finding what works for the individual and make sure that it's sustainable, because kids can't do everything, and actually explaining to them, I'm sorry, you can't do 10 sports. If you want to be performance level in this, that, or the other, you might have to start to specialize, but that needs to be their decision. And it certainly doesn't need to happen at 9, 10, and 11. Okay, that might be something when they become a bit more confident in themselves in their mid-teens and they think, oh, this is for me, or it's not for me, which sounds weird as a swimming person talking to swimming parents. The swimming might not be the thing for them. And the example that I've given of many successful people in other areas of life and sport who have come from swimming and then transferred into other areas. I think it's important to keep that in the front of our minds. That it is about their journey and not ours.
Yeah.
Okay, so a question that's come in the chat, which is a very different topic. How as parents, can we support our child for failure?
Lovely question. So thank you very much, Charlie, for that one. I think a couple of things. First thing is it's inevitable. It's inevitable in life and it's inevitable in sport. Sport has a very unique way of being able to teach kids that at a young age in a relatively safe environment. If you lose a race, it's not the end of the world at 12. But actually, if they've never experienced failure up to the age of 18 and then they don't get a job or, you know, whatever it is in their life where a failure comes along, they really struggle. So sport as a whole teaches kids how to deal with failure by its very nature, because in a competition with 8 lanes, only one person goes home the winner. So I think that on its own is a really important thing, to recognize that failure happens, is perfectly normal. And I think the second part that it links to is actually giving them that psychological safety that their value as a human being doesn't change because they've failed. And I think that can be something we really fear. We think, for example, if a kid's aim is to do X, qualify for the regionals, for example, and they don't, that suddenly they might feel that they're lesser of a person. So I think for parents out there, just actually being able to have a comfortable conversation with your kids that whatever happens, it's going to be okay. And that's it. Keep it as simple as that. If a kid can touch the wall and know that their value as a human being doesn't change because of their sporting results, that really can lift the weight off their shoulders. And ultimately, it's one of the things where, having sat in the gallery in many different competitions over the years, I've seen it done really well. And I've seen it go horribly wrong for kids. And the parents go, look, you did your best. And that's okay. And then I've seen it the other way around, where I've seen screaming and shouting and probably some very inappropriate behavior. And I think I look at that and I see immediately that child heading for the door in terms of the sport. So I think it's really important we have half an eye on that long-term view and say, when we're looking at failure, one, they're going to need to learn how to deal with it for life. But number two, we need to make sure that they're comfortable enough in it now so they actually stay in the sport long enough to achieve their potential and actually get the best out of it.
Does that come down to goal setting? Maybe you might have like an easier goal and a medium goal and a hard goal. So let's say the hard goal would be that regional time, then the easier goal would be not breathing last 5 meters. Would that be a better way to judge it?
Well, I think it's the language that actually sits around goals. So some of that is actually around process versus outcome, because the outcome is win the medal, get the qualifying time, whatever it is. And actually that's out of the person's control. If a 13-year-old boy who's starting to go for a growth spurt, does all his training properly, eats everything he's supposed to do, et cetera, turns up at the meet, and because their body's just grown a little bit and they're neurologically drained, they then dive in and they somehow can't perform well. And I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And actually they can't control that. So I think it's really important that when we're talking about goal setting, that actually the language around it is within the swimmer's control. Because if they go to a meet and the goal is, on a 200 free short course to have 8 streamlines, and you get out and you go, the streamlines, all of them were brilliant. Okay, that immediately flips the language of, well, you didn't get your qualifying time, because you can have really bad technical swimming and then achieve a positive outcome and then ignore all of the rest of the stuff. And it's not all about that outcome, because ultimately if kids think that just winning is enough, when they get to a certain point where they're not winning, they then go, oh, well, that's because you didn't streamline, for example. And then say, well, no one's picked me up on that ever, because all we did was every time I won, went, oh, great job, you're amazing, you're brilliant. And they just get to a point where they've never dealt with failure and technical feedback before. And then they drop off a cliff when suddenly everyone else catches up with them and their technical skills are letting them down.
I think this question that we had beforehand kind of flows quite nicely into it. My swimmer wants to quit, but they've got a huge talent. How should I approach this?
It's a really good question and a really important one, because I think we can have a whole discussion around the subject area of talent on its own. But I think ultimately, what does a swimmer want to do? And if a swimmer wants to stop swimming, is there a reason why? And is that reason out of our control? Because it might be, for example, I don't enjoy swimming anymore. It's not what I want to spend my time doing. That's very different to why do you want to quit swimming, for example? Oh, because I'm not getting any positive feedback. Okay, well, we can actually start giving you some positive feedback. Do you want to stay involved? Oh, yes, please. So it's thinking about the layer down from that surface response. I see it all the time with coaches feeding back to swimmers, and a coach called Dave, who I've done some work with over the years, has a really good system where he will not let the swimmers walk off until they give them at least one bit of positive feedback, so that when they leave a session at least, or a racing session, there's at least one development piece of feedback, but there's also something positive to go alongside it, and it keeps that balance, so they don't get to a point where they feel like everything's negative. So when swimmers say I want to quit, often it's a perception that everything's not going right, nothing's going well, and then we actually have to say, well, are we feeding back positively? Are they getting constructive support? Do they feel like actually that we're stressing so much about performance that we're forgetting to enjoy ourselves? And even Adam said that in 2018 after the Commonwealth Games in Australia. He's like, I've got to go back and actually learn to enjoy my swimming a little bit more, because I'm stressing so much about really detailed performance things that I'm forgetting the bigger picture of actually enjoying it, and I swim better when I'm enjoying myself.
I feel like this one comes down to more coaching side, because swimming is quite a mundane sport, going up and down, watching a blue line, and it can get a little bit boring, especially doing, like, I don't know, something crazy like 4 1000s. You've got to try to keep yourself mind occupied. And I just feel like coaches need to do something. It's not really a parent thing in my head. I know that the kids will come home and moan to the parents because you've got to vent to someone, haven't you? But I think the coaches have got to do something to make it a little bit more interesting, different processes of some form.
I think there's a real balance with coaches as a whole, and I'm biased because I came through the coaching system. So I was an athlete, then I was a coach, and now I support coaches. So I've seen it from different sides, and I think it's really important for us to understand that coaches have 20, 30, 40, however many swimmers in front of them to support to start with. So the individual expectation of support that as a parent we might have for our kids is going to be very different to that coach who's got their time split 20 or 30 or 40 ways. Now, that's not to say coaches shouldn't be giving positive feedback to kids or mixing up sessions so they feel creative. But ultimately, there are certain processes that swimming takes you through, and there's ways of making it more interesting. We can say 2100s off you go, or we can actually say 2100s off you go. And on each block of 5, I want you to think about a specific technical goal. And then during those blocks of 5, actually giving feedback on those technical goals. So it's the same set, but actually the language around it is slightly different. So you can't get away from the training element of swimming, but you certainly can mix it up and make it interesting. And I think during COVID, a lot of clubs had to explore that, because they didn't have a pool. Actually, they suddenly went, oh, all our kids have come back after lockdown and they're swimming pretty well. And it's like, yeah, because suddenly you've engaged them in running and circuits and Zoom workouts and all these other things. Yoga and Pilates was becoming more popular. And actually, if you go and watch the elite, like the absolute top level in any sport, they won't be doing long, boring, mundane training. They might be doing a lot of training, but actually they'll be doing stuff that allows them to grow and develop as a human being. I remember watching years ago, one of the national centres was doing stuff like ballet with one of their groups, rock climbing and things like that. And it doesn't detract from the fact that if you're going to be a top level swimmer, you're going to have to do a lot of mileage, not loads of mileage, but plenty of swimming up and down, which can sometimes be monotonous. But as coaches, as parents, and anyone else in that sphere around swimmers, we've actually got to make sure that we're engaging with them and finding out what they find interesting. Because if, for example, kids like playing games, and I say that very loosely, you can make training sessions game-like without actually making it entertainment, because you don't want to go down that route where it just feels like it's childcare. But equally, you don't want swimmers just leaving because they're finding it quite monotonous. So it's definitely a balance.
See, would this have helped you, Scott, back in your swimming career?
Yeah, because I dropped out at 16 because my times plateaued and training was, I don't know, we were doing 10, 400 IMs and I was a 50 and 100 swimmer. My mind just went blank. Actually, for me, I didn't understand that there was an option almost to move clubs. I didn't quite understand that. I don't know. I didn't want to leave my friends because, like we've said many times, the friends that we formed at that club they're our lifelong friends. They're our best mates now. But maybe to keep me in the sport past 16, it would have been better to go to a fresh environment, maybe just to spark things up a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, I was kind of opposite, because I think I went to, how many clubs did I go to in the end? 4 in the end. So I was able to do that adjustment. So maybe that would have helped for you. But I don't know if you were more specific to sprinting, whereas you need to keep your doors open. We've had loads of podcast guests on.
That's true.
And they've been very open to doing, like Ed Mildred, for example. He's known for 100 100 free, 100 fly, but actually he's happy to do a 400 IM, for example. And that's maybe something that you should have done, or, made it a bit more interesting for you.
Why don't we talk about that then? Why is it important not to specialise down too young?
I think the example, the language used there around keeping doors open is probably the best way of describing it. And I think also we're talking about taking pressure off people. If a child at the age of 13 is told they're a 50 freestyler and all they do is 50 freestyles and then their 53 goes off the boil, they suddenly feel like they have nothing else to focus on. So I think, number one, from an interest point of view, we just spoke about mixing it up. Mix up your competitive events. Certainly the best swimmers I've ever worked with, although they might have ended up specialising, they certainly did a lot of different events when they were younger, which actually spread the load of pressure. But it also meant when they go through the growth stages, which they will, it's guaranteed to happen. I say this to parents, your kids could sit in the corner and do nothing and they will still grow and develop. Ultimately, when they go through those periods, some strokes will fly and some strokes will drop back. And that's fine. That's okay. There was a guy that I used to train with, came to our club as a 200 breaststroker and 3 years later went to Olympics on 1500 free. So, and there's there's plenty of examples of that. But then equally, you might have a swimmer who's like, I absolutely just want to do breaststroke, for example, and actually go, okay, well, let's maybe do 50, 100, 200 at a range of events and maybe a couple of 100 or 200 IMs just to keep it mixed up, because generally the breaststrokers have that strength, if you like, in medleys that a lot of other swimmers that aren't breaststrokers do have. So I think that's something to think about when it comes around specialising. But again, it goes back to what's right for the individual, because you might have a swimmer, I had a swimmer that I worked with all the way up to international level, and their portfolio of events was everything. And we're almost sitting there going, at what point? They're still going to an international event and swimming a 1500, a 400 medley, the 4x2 relay, and you're thinking, like, at some point you have to come down. But I tell you what, if you look at what Duncan Scott does, Katie Shanahan, people like that are coming through and swimming multiple events at the big events, that's happened not by chance. That's happened because over the years they haven't just gone, well, I'm a 50 breaststroker or whatever they decide they're going to be. They've kept all those doors open. So I think it's more about taking the pressure off, keeping doors open, but also seeing where your swimming goes. Because we don't know what a 12-year-old's going to look like when they're 16, 17, and neither's, for all of us, we didn't. I've certainly did more events post 21 than I did in the whole of my swimming career leading up to 21, because I'd physiologically settled down. And I was like, right, now I'm interested in this and that and that. So I think it's important to have that variety.
Yeah, I mean, I can almost testify to that, because I specialised down and just did 50 and 100 to 16. I stopped. I'm now back swimming, but I'm open water. I'm like 5K and above, which if you spoke to my coach when I was 16, that's unheard of. I wouldn't go anywhere near those distances. So doors do need to be kept open. While we're talking a little bit about racing, why don't we cover kind of swimmers' nerves on competition day? Because it's a big topic, especially for young teenagers.
Okay, so nerves is one that's, again, it's normal. It happens to everybody. And I think it's how it's managed, but also how it's supported by, I guess, the environment around them. So if we know that kids get nervous on race day and the last thing they need is all of us going, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Every 5 seconds, actually just leave them alone. If they need to go and chill out for a little bit, that's fine. So I think dealing with nerves, everyone's going to have their own way of coping with it, but it's perfectly normal. Being nervous just shows that you care. And it's how you actually harness that nervous energy and then apply it to your race. I've been quite following a range of different sports at the moment, and I've been watching a few interviews of Formula One drivers, and they say the same thing. They're acutely aware the whole way up that they're actually going to get into something that could end up taking their life, ultimately. But actually, suddenly they get in the car and they go into race mode, and all those nerves just dissipate. So I think it's perfectly normal, and actually it's finding ways of people coping in their own way. For some people, it's wearing headphones. For some people, it's going for a walk. For some people, it's doing a warm-up a bit longer than they might usually do just to settle themselves down a little bit. It's going to be different for everybody. But again, they don't need to wait until the day before a major competition to figure that out. Go to some of these smaller meets at the start of the year, club championships, things like that, and actually use those as opportunities to go, right, I know I'm getting nervous, but there's no pressure here at all. So I'm just going to turn up and try a different way of dealing with it. So I think exploration and finding what works for the individual is a really good way of dealing with nerves.
Yeah, so it's a good topic, actually, and one that hopefully we're going to explore, because, of course, a teammate on AP Clinics is Tom Bates, who's absolutely incredible at the psychology side of things. I mean, he's so good. He's into the football. He was with Mikel Arteta with Arsenal not so long ago. F1, I think he was with. Just awesome. Hopefully we get him on for that, because there's a lot of things that play with mental demons. I get nervous all the time.
Before this live stream,
I was nervous, but then as soon as you're on, it's fine, and you're flying then. But it's just a lead up to it, because I'm very much an overthinker. So is there a way? Obviously, Tom would know, and he would advise me. But on your station, or on his station, he was talking about the breathing and being confident, shoulders back and stuff like that. Is that the sort of thing that should be taught to 12-year-olds upwards, even younger maybe?
Well, I think it's quite funny that you mentioned that, because Tom does our psychology on our AP Plus platform, like the athlete support kind of Netflix style platform that we offer. And he talks a lot about progressive exercises. So again, it almost comes back to the way we develop swimmers. You don't suddenly learn all your skills in one hit. It takes time. The clinics gave them a really good taste of that, and actually starts to show you the power of the mind when you really focus on some of these skills. Breathing control is obviously one of them amongst many others. But I think something I've learned around spending time around Tom, it was an incredible 10, 11 days around him. Actually, you learn very quickly that none of these things, again, happen by chance. You've actually got to take the time to learn and develop these psychological skills in the same way that most people don't suddenly just improve their nutrition overnight. Actually, it takes time to form those habits. And in the same way, their S&C, it's going to take time to progress that. And in the same in the pool, if you look at a 9-year-old coming into a club for the first time versus a 19-year-old, their skill development, I hope, will have improved significantly. So it comes back to, again, that patience and actually making sure that it's gradual. And especially with psychology, it's a hugely powerful tool that I think was undervalued. Go back maybe a few generations, and certainly in all sports, we're seeing a lot more of it, where actually it doesn't matter what level you're at, you're still having to perform. It might be club champs, it might be the Olympic Games. So actually learning the tools to cope in that environment are really, really useful, and they transfer into your life. So actually, if you've got good psychological skills that support managing pressured situations, if you're 25 years old and you're suddenly in a boardroom, or you're suddenly signing off an important commercial deal, or whatever industry you end up working in, or you become a doctor or a policeman or a firefighter or whatever it is, you're going to have to deal with pressured environments. So having those skills is something that stays with you. And I think, again, that's something you can't really measure on a scoreboard. We can all focus on outcome. But actually, if a kid's learned how to manage their emotions and control their confidence and deal with nerves, that on its own is something we should be saying, great job, that was really, really good. Because in 10 years' time, that's going to really help them in life.
It's definitely, swimming gives you life skills that I can testify now. I'm in architecture. It's given me a work ethic that is almost unrivaled. And I think you've spoken before about, is it Andy Jameson runs a recruitment firm, and if someone's a swimmer, he will automatically put them forwards because of the skills that swimming has given a child, and dealing with nerves, work ethic, it's all part of it.
Commitment, determination, all that sort of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Another question. Any tips on preparing my child for school, exams, and training schedule? Kev, do you want to kick this one off? And I think I can probably testify quite a lot to this one.
This could be a Scott question. Yeah.
Okay. Some very simple things are around being frank and honest as to what's going to work for that person. So if we take an exam schedule, it doesn't suddenly get dropped on you. You usually know 4 weeks before or however long before. So actually, it's being pragmatic and saying, right, you've got to be in school at this time. You're supposed to be training this time, and this time. The biggest thing for me is making sure that, number one, it's planned. But number two, and this is really important, you do not stop swimming. It's the worst thing you can do. And I'm probably hearing coaches banging drums all around the country going, finally, someone's saying it. But it's true. Imagine somebody had spent all of their time learning how to cope with pressure through sport. And then in the most pressured part of their academic year, you take away that vent and that release. It's the worst thing possible, because instead of turning up having vented in the morning session or vented in the evening session, both physically and mentally, they're turning up and everything's cluttered and going around in their mind. And you think, what are you doing? I'm not saying don't stop some swimming, in the same way that our performance swimmers, when they get to, say, an Olympic Games, might defer a module at university because actually the swimming's more important. So I think it's, again, planning it out, but actually making sure that it's balanced so that that individual feels like as they move through the system, whether that's GCSEs, A-levels, university, whatever it is, it's manageable and it's sustainable. And there's always going to be pinch points. We're not going to get it perfect. But if that's communicated really early, so the kids come home on the 1st of December and say, right, in January, I've got this, this, and this. And you go, right, we've got counties in January. So what we're going to do, we're going to drop your coach a message and say, look, you've got this, this, this in through January. Understand we've got a couple of heavy weekends. So we're suggesting that maybe we'll chat to the coach. What would you suggest? And it's that communication, as opposed to on a Monday morning in January, the swimmer just doesn't turn up for a week. Oh, where they gone? Oh, they got exams this week. It'd be nice for someone to have told us. So I think it's just that, not just professional courtesy, but it's common sense. Ultimately we want what's best for that person in both their academics and in their sport. So let's have a chat about it. And I think that's a really good way to get started.
Yeah, for me, I think there's kind of 3 topics that I'd say need to be focused on, kind of prioritizing. So you need to kind of judge with your swimmer whether school is the direction for them. In which case, if they've got a big exam, then swimming can't come before that at that point. You need them to put the priority of study ahead of it. Then it's preparing, like Kev said, you need to speak to the coaches about when these moments are going to pop up along the season, so that maybe there's a training block that needs to be fitted in before exams or after exams. The coach needs to be aware of what's going on. And then the third one is kind of flexibility. There might be a moment where you've said, look, we're focusing on exams and the swimmer needs an outlet, and you need to be flexible to say, right, let's concentrate on swimming for a week. Let's get yourself away from the desk, essentially. And even though you've prepared a plan in stone, be flexible about how you move around with that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to organization, effectively. Organizing your day. I know you, Scott, are very regimented almost. You have like a whiteboard at home, like this is what I'm doing at 8, 9, 10, blah, 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 and it goes right the way through the day.
That's because of swimming.
Yeah, because of swimming, exactly. It's another life skill, right? And I think if you were to take the swimming away from the normal school day, if you like, it's almost breaking routine. And then suddenly you're not in the sort of mindset that you've normally got. So I would actually continue doing the same amount of training, maybe take 1 or 2 hours a week. Depends how many you're doing.
Just if you've got an exam the next day or something.
Yeah, or something like that. But it's good for the brain to keep firing, and it's good for the what's it called? The neurological sort of side of things, isn't it? So keeps you in routine. Is what I'd try and do that.
Great stuff. What I think we'll do now is we'll take a quick 60-second break, just so people can fire any more questions into the chat and give a chance for people to type them out. And then we'll come back in 60 seconds after a quick ad break, and then we'll answer some more questions. Does that sound good, guys?
Sounds great.
Here at Propulsion Swimming, our vision is to give the sports we love the coverage and publicity it deserves. Swimming is an amazing sport, and we believe that it should be given more exposure than it currently gets from traditional media outlets. With the superstars we currently have at the elite level, we want to provide a platform where everyone can watch, listen and be inspired to become the best swimmers they can be. We have a wide variety of videos across our channel, including swimming drills to help improve your technique, podcast episodes where we talk to amazing special guests, and live streams where we talk about popular topics in the swimming world, as well as so much more swimming related content. Come and check out Propulsion Swimming on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and get involved in our community of like-minded swimming fans.
Okay, so a couple of topics that came into us beforehand while we still wait for people to put their questions into the chat. How much should I be pushing / encouraging my swimmer? And one that goes alongside that is, should I wake my swimmer up or should they be doing it themselves? So a bit more about getting them to training when they don't want to get to training, because it happens.
Yeah, especially the morning ones. Yeah, this is a good one. Kev, over to you.
Okay, so it's a really good one. I mean, the word that jumps out to me is independence. I don't expect a 13-year-old to cartwheel out of bed in the morning, whether it's for swimming or pretty much anything else. So I think there has to be a level of being pragmatic, but equally there has to be a level of ownership. And I think some kids are naturally going to be more motivated and certainly at a younger age to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to wake you up. And I know some swimmers that I've spoke to previously have said exactly that through age group years. They actually were the ones waking up their parents, which is great. But there's a huge difference. Kind of the wording you use there around pushing and encouraging, there's a big difference between those two things in my head. Ultimately, if a swimmer doesn't particularly want to go training because they're a teenager, is very different to, I do not want to go swimming anymore, I don't enjoy it. That's a very different thing. So I think, and ultimately, they're going to have moments, they're going to have times where things aren't going well. They might have had a bad meet, or they've fallen out of one of their friends at the club, or whatever it is. It's not going to be nice, smooth, dandy line where they just constantly get better and constantly want to go. So I think as parents, we have to read that. But ultimately, we need to look at it over like almost a snapshot of stepping back and saying, look, in the last 5 weeks, at least 3 times they've said to me they absolutely hate swimming and don't want to go anymore. Is number one, is there something going on that I don't know about? Number two, is this for them anymore? So I think it is a really good question, but I think it's important to have step back and have an honest discussion about it. And actually, sometimes there will be phases where there's plateaus. There's plenty of times when swimmers go through plateaus over a period of years or 2 years. And I get the example I give to parents of the most elite swimmer we know of is Adam. And actually say between 2018, when he broke the record at the European Championships, and then 2016, when he broke the world record at the Olympic Games, there was a 2-year period there. And then go to your swimmers and say, hey, if in your main event over a 2-year period you didn't PB, what would you do? And most swimmers are like, oh, I'd quit. And it's like, but this is the best we've ever had, and he didn't do it. So actually, it's having that kind of wider view and actually saying, well, what are they getting out of it? And if their why, for example, is, well, actually, I love going and training with my friends, I love being fit and healthy, and I enjoy going away to meets and having a really good experience, well, then let's just focus on that. Because ultimately, if we're pushing for something that's out of their control, growth, development, that sort of stuff, we're then going to be focusing on the wrong things. So that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is now performance-based, isn't it? Especially because we've done so well at Tokyo, and our national swimmers are doing quite well internationally. In European juniors, we were quite strong. Whereas I think we're kind of taken away from the social aspect of things and the health and fitness and side of it. If you were to just get rid of performance, maybe just for like a week or two in a schedule, I think a lot more people would be happier to be in swimming and part of swimming clubs again. Again, that's a little bit more towards coaching, I guess. But yes. I'm quite interested what you think about getting a swimmer up early. Should it be a swimmer's choice to do that, or should it be a parent to wake them up?
I think the most important thing with that is that it's explained to them in advance. So if, for example, on Sunday you say to a swimmer, if you want to go training in the morning, you need to set your alarm. The swimmer needs to own that. And then if they turn around and complain because they didn't set their alarm and they stayed in bed, you go, well, you need to own getting up in the morning. And then Tuesday, when they set their alarm, we're then teaching skill ownership. Yeah. And actually, that's something, it doesn't matter, again, setting your alarm, or it could be anything else. Did you pack your bag? How many swimmers go to events and go, oh, you didn't pack my goggles? It's like, well, why was somebody else packing your bag? You're not going to have them packing your bag at the Olympics. And I think it's really important to actually get that across, because that's life. At 19, they're going to be the ones loading up the dishwasher, doing their washing, cooking dinner. And actually, if they don't understand how to pack their own bag or set their alarm to get up in the morning from a young age, then they're going to really struggle. But equally, when they're in that early phase, there does need to be a little bit of, sometimes they might not want to go, come on, you'll be fine. And once they're in the car, they're like, oh, okay, I'll be all right. And I think it's the sort of thing where as a parent, you've got to make that judgment call, and no one can say that for you. But ultimately, swimmers need to learn to own what it is they're doing.
I would also add that if a swimmer is truly struggling with early mornings, because they're tough when you're young, or not that you should be doing too many at such a young age, you need to almost look back and see if there is an issue there. Are they staying up watching screen time too late at night, or are they just, I don't know, their mind or motivation isn't quite in early mornings? So if you miss 2 early mornings a week, it isn't going to be the end of the world.
Yeah, and I think something that when I used to coach full-time, I used to run the club's social medias, and I would get notifications when I woke up in the morning at midnight of a swimmer liking a photo or a post. And then the next morning at 5 o'clock, they'd stroll on poolside looking like a zombie and go, oh, I'm so tired and I haven't recovered from last night. I was like, well, you were still awake at midnight on Facebook. So, and it's, I think it's having that kind of understanding that they are kids, and we shouldn't be expecting kids to exhibit world-class performance behaviours at 9 years old. That's completely unrealistic. But equally, there's a process they're going to have to go through to get to that point if that's what they want to do. And even if they don't want to go to the highest performance levels, there has to be that understanding that, yes, they might have an underlying issue. They might struggle with sleep, for example, or they might have a medical condition. They need to go and sit down with a doctor and actually have a conversation about that. But again, that's away from the pool. But ultimately, from a normal swimming journey, if you like, there are going to be some things that they're going to have to take on board. Early mornings is one of them. Okay, especially if you're in the unfortunate position, if you like, that you have to travel 20 minutes or half an hour or an hour to training. For my university research, I actually spoke to quite a few former international swimmers, and there was a lot of these kind of things coming in. I cannot believe the amount of commitment my parents made into all of that sort of stuff. So it's very easy for us to look at it and go, oh, well, they should all just be setting their alarms, or they shouldn't be setting their alarms, whichever way it goes. But I think there are quite a lot of nuances to actually look at.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was very much a self-motivated swimmer. So I would always wake up my mum or dad to take me to the pool. And actually, if I didn't wake them up, I didn't go. And that was the way.
Oh,
I don't know.
really?
It's almost like a predetermined contract kind of thing, wasn't it? It's like if you don't wake me up, we're not going. And so when I got to 17, it's like, oh bliss, I can lie in all the time. But that was always my mentality. Was if you're not waking yourself up, then you clearly don't want to do it, or that was my mentality. But I know some people will suffer with, like you say, medical issues, or they struggle with sleep, or whatever it could be. But that was quite an interesting question. Thank you very much for that person sending that in.
A nice one in the chat that's come in, which is nutrition and food. A very different topic from what we've been speaking about right now. If your swimmer swims at 5 p.m, should I give them a full meal at 3:30 after school, or a snack before training and their meal after swimming?
That's a really good question. First thing I would say is actually looking at our day as a whole. And I've worked with some fantastic nutritionists over the years. One of the things they'll always talk about is actually looking at nutrition and a week, like zoomed out a little bit. So if, for example, you've got a schedule where you've got a training at 5 p.m. and you've got training at, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning. Actually, that's the whole day of nutrition you need to be looking at, and actually saying, well, what are they having for breakfast? What are they having at lunchtime? Because if they have a decent size pre-pool snack in the morning, then a decent sized breakfast, then a proper lunch, not just a sandwich and that's it, a full lunch at lunchtime, then actually they might only need a snack at 3:30 before they go to the pool, and then dinner afterwards. But again, we've then got to start looking at the actual reality of it. Are they going straight from school to the pool because of traveling? If so, it's got to be something that can be kept in the car. So you're then looking at kit bag stuff and things that don't necessarily need to be kept hot. All of those sorts of things are really important to factor in. But ultimately, again, none of this is a surprise. So I would step back and actually look at the whole week, almost like the exam timetable example. I'm actually saying, right, you've got this, this, and this. Family logistics are this, this, and this. So there's 3 times a week where actually you're going straight from the school to pool. There's not enough time to have a hot meal. So make sure on those days, I'm going to give you double lunch or whatever it is to make sure that you've eaten a really good solid meal at lunchtime. And then in the afternoon, before you get to the pool, make sure you've had a snack. Might be a banana or whatever it is. Everyone's different. But actually, you don't want to be forcing down a full meal at 3:30 and then seeing it again at 5:05 when the swimmer dives in.
Yeah, that's the last thing you want to do.
What I would say is, Kev, there's great advice over on the AP Race Plus platform with your nutritionist on there that can gift it. We also did a really good podcast with the lead nutritionist at Youth Sport Nutrition. So we did a guide, basically a very simple guide to a swimmer's day and then a swimmer's race. We've got a video coming out for it soon. I'll put the link into the chat if you can click and get to it. I'm not sure if you can, but it's there. If it's a 30-minute chat with a nutritionist, and it is a very, very simple guide, just a broad overview of how to approach nutrition in swimming, essentially.
Yeah, getting the carbs, the protein, and fats, which actually you do need in a normal swimmer's diet. But it's the timings, isn't it? Because, of course, you don't want to eat 30 minutes before swimming, because then, like you say, you'll see it 30 minutes later, or you'll suffer with cramp or whatever else, or stitch, actually, not cramp, stitch. So you do have to be wary of, again, it comes down to planning, doesn't it? Planning an organization and doing it like a whiteboard, like Scott does, like 8 o'clock we do this, 9 o'clock. I think sometimes it does come down to doing that and writing in your calendar or your diary,
Your planning stuff's really important, but I think also the other thing is around the education piece, and I think that's, you mentioned with like AP Plus, that's what we're trying to do. So, over 104 weeks of content, all snapshots, but actually it's a very small educational piece every single week, because actually that's how kids learn. We're in a world of swipe right on the stories on Instagram and stuff like that. Their attention spans are like 10 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever it is, and actually trying to get content across educationally to actually say, look, it's important you eat this because of that. Okay, cool. Right, now move on to something else. And then actually start applying those educational lessons. So there's no point them actually learning about having a balanced meal on race day, for example, and then on race day to go and have a full English and then go out to McDonald's at lunchtime. So it's not just the education piece, it's actually applying it and actually setting that example. Because ultimately, if you're not setting that example as a household unit, but also in your normal racing and training environment, it won't become a habit. Therefore, it's not going to stick.
Now, I know you're not a full-on nutritionist, but would you recommend any kind of sack but let's go before and after training?
It's a really good question. What I'd say is making sure that you have a stock of things that don't deteriorate really quickly. So generally speaking, there will always be in my kit bags, whether it's pool or land-based stuff, either apple, banana, some form of flapjacky stuff. Everyone's different. Some people can't tolerate like solid foods around training competitions. So they might actually just drink smoothies, and that's a really nice way around it.
That's a really important point. Actually, something we learned from that nutritionist was actually drinking your calories is not a problem either. That's actually really actively encouraged, especially before morning sessions. There's no harm in having a drink rather than eating. That is quite a common one.
And it's also something that can be accessed. You know, if you think of a training session, and I'll go back to my examples when I swam, finished training at 7:30 in the morning, and then I'd be in the showers for 10 minutes trying to, just wake up again and get ready to head off to university. And I'd be drinking a smoothie in that. So by the time I'd got changed, got out and got home at 8:15, my body's already started refueling and recovering. It's different for everyone because I know everyone's palate, especially at a young age, is very different. But again, don't wait for the big meets and the important parts of the season to start exploring this. Do it nice and early. Try different things here and there. See what works, see what doesn't, and also actually speak to the young swimmers out there and say, what do you like? I preferred that and that, and that worked well for me, and have a conversation around that sort of thing.
It's almost trial and error. I think I did that a lot when we knew we were going into a tough week of training, or there was let's go for a race pace set on a Saturday morning, and we were kind of replicating that to be a race pace event, like the 200 free, for example. And so for that entire week, I would plan out what I would eat, and if I were to perform badly on that Saturday morning, then I knew that plan wouldn't work. So then the next time we would do that same session, I would then adjust that week's eating, and eventually you'd find the right thing. And then when you do get to the major event, let's say nationals, for example, then you know what to eat the week before. That's the way I did it anyway. So it's a bit of advice for everyone if you want to take it or not.
Do expensive carbon suits make a difference in competitions, in your opinion? As you're quite active in the chat, Catherine, can I ask you maybe to submit what sort of age we're looking at for this?
Yeah,
because that is a big determining factor, I feel.
What I would say on this, and I don't think out of the 30 talks I did over the summer, I didn't get this not asked in any of the talks.
Did you know?
No, I was in. It came up every single one. I don't think a single session went by with out there, and because it's people just seem to think that it's a necessity, and it isn't. And the thing that I say to people is go along to the Olympic pool and drop somebody's racing suit into the water and watch it win the Olympics, and obviously it doesn't. It's the human being. It's the cherry on top of the cake, and ultimately it comes back to my example of progressive work when they're moving through the teenage years. If at the age of 12 they're doing everything, getting all the support, have the racing suit and everything else, then when you get to that international major meet and a sponsor gives you a suit, which invariably they will, then where do you go from there? And I think the other thing also is that there's a cost thing to it massively. But there's also a confidence thing, because as a young swimmer, especially when you go through those plateaus of growth and development and those sorts of things, if you feel like, as in, you've already got the best suit out there and all of that on, and you're still not improving in your swimming, you're really going to start thinking, I don't know, because you're placing your faith, if you like, on getting better on a suit. And actually, that's not the case at all. And if you look at, I think it's the American Swimming Association, I think Scottish Swimming, correct me if I'm wrong, and a number of clubs have now followed suit in banning tech suits for, I want to say 12 and unders, maybe 13 and unders.
I think so, yeah.
Which is obviously really, really important, because I mean, one of my friends trained out in Australia for a few years, and he was out there as a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old, and was like, that you couldn't race at the regional events in anything other than Speedos as a guy. That was it. Because they were like, this is not an option. And I think people, place too much faith in external things too early on, whereas actually the ultimate thing of a human getting better, it's the human bit that gets better. And if at the end of it you can put an extra 0.1% on with the suit, brilliant. But ultimately, an amazing suit doesn't change the work that swimmers done across the year, what they've been eating, their psychology, their land-based work, and their technical skill. It's just literally the cherry on top of the cake.
Do you reckon it's a bit of a placebo effect? So they think they're mentally going to do better, and it just doesn't happen that way, or it might happen that way. Do you reckon it must be? That's the way That's the way I see it.
Especially the sizing of them. So if you look at the way that the pro athletes work, generally speaking, they're going to have relatively tailored suits that are built around very fully physiologically developed bodies, as opposed to a 12-year-old. that actually, or a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old, whatever it is, and they're still developing and growing. So the whole point of those suits around what they're actually designed to do around compression, reducing muscle vibration, those sorts of things, the muscles are still developing. So it's almost like trying to take a road car and then race it on a Formula One track. It's not there yet. So I think actually allowing time for the body to settle down and then go, right, we know what your body looks like. Now we can try and find the right suit for you. Because as a senior, some people prefer different types of suits, different types of shapes. Obviously, with the men, it's a little bit more limited in terms of coverage. So shorts is shorts, but even then, you've got the difference between, say, the arenas and the speedos, etc. So I think it's something to look at further down the line. But ultimately, you know, I think back to my coaching years, and I had a 15-year-old who won, I think, 6 national gold medals without a hat on and in a pair of speedos. And he stood behind the block and was like, I train harder than any of you here. I'm technically more proficient. I mean, he didn't say that, but that was his attitude. He's like, I know I've worked harder than any of you here, and I know I'm more technically proficient. So I don't care that you've all got your fancy suits on. I'm still going to beat you. And the confidence that gave him, especially as he moved into his senior years, was really, really important.
Now, Kev, I know you've got to go racing later on in half hour's time. You've got to get to Arena League. Like, I'm sure a few parents are going to have to drop off as well. So I think we'll do one more question from kind of that we had beforehand, and then one more in the chat, and then we'll discuss at the end. My kid goes to training every day. Why isn't he progressing to a higher standard? Does training hours relate to performance?
I think the big thing with that is a habit forming to start with. So ultimately, your technical skill is going to be a measure of how many times you practice something at a certain standard. And I think we're very much looking at a swimming outcome there. So if, for example, the question there is the kid goes training every single day, why aren't they progressing to a higher standard in swimming? What we're saying is, why aren't they moving higher up the rankings, or why aren't they getting a PB or whatever it is? And actually, if that's a kid, we then need to step back and go, right, let's look at the child as a whole. Well, they've got school going on, they've got friends going on, they're doing other sports, okay? They've got all of this other stuff going on in their life. And actually, their swimming might not be improving because they're actually doing another sport 3 times a week. And actually, they're happy doing that, and that's okay. So I think it's actually looking, number one, at the human being as a whole and saying what's going on in their life, because it's not just about the training. There's a lot of other stuff that factors into it. But also, swimmers go through plateaus. The example I gave earlier with Adam, it wasn't that Adam wasn't trying between Rio and Glasgow in 2018. Of course he wasn't. He was training full-time as a professional athlete. But ultimately, sometimes you're talking about so many different technical things that interrelate to get a PB or move up the rankings or whatever it is. Focusing on just that outcome is the worst thing we can do, because actually the swimmer's like, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do and I'm not improving, therefore I'm going to stop. Whereas actually, if we're saying, yeah, but over this 6 months or a year or whatever it is that you haven't improved as an outcome, your technique's got so much better. Your nutrition, you're doing so much better at that. Keep doing it, because all you're doing is you're basically saving money in the bank. And at some point soon, you're going to be withdrawing that, and you're going to get that outcome you're looking for. But focusing on the process and all the things that factor in as a swimmer and measuring your success against that is the best way to achieve that long-term sustainable success.
It's communication again. It's all down to communication. How do you get it across to, let's say, the swimmer that we're talking about? How do you get it across to that swimmer that you're on this plateau at the moment, but if you just wait a couple more months, weeks, years, I don't know how long it could be, for that little incline, how do you explain that to a swimmer?
Well, I think that the biggest thing to, I guess, support them is that them as a person. So if, for example, whatever the plateau is or however long it's going on for, you have a conversation with them and they'll actually tell you why they're not happy or whatever it is. And if they actually turn around and go, yeah, I know I haven't improved, but right now I'm just enjoying seeing my friends, then it's our problem. It's not their problem to worry about. So I think ultimately we've got to try and make sure that we're dealing with their expectations and their frustrations if they have them. And if they don't, then, you know, we need to button it, which is really difficult. And I'd say the same thing to coaches out there. It's not about us and it's not about parents in this situation. What we're saying is the swimmer happy? And if, for example, right now they understand the basic science behind it, that they're going for a growth spurt, they've got all this other stuff going on in their life, and swimming isn't suddenly flying forwards, and they're okay with that, then we need to be okay with that, because it really is about them. And I think the second point on that question around training hours relating to performance, again, I'm sure the coaches will be whooping for me here, but ultimately there is no way of getting away from the fact that how you do in a consistent performing sphere, if you like, whatever competition level you compete at, is going to be related to how not just often you train, but how well you train. Okay, 5 2-hour sessions a week done exceptionally high quality is always going to be better than 7 2-hour sessions a week done badly. So I think it's looking at the quality of what you're doing, how you're approaching the skills, and then again, all these other things that sit around you as a swimmer, because the person is the one that stands behind the block. It's not just a swimmer, it's every other aspect of their life that's going to impact on how they perform. So actually viewing their life as a much more holistic view and understanding that all of those things impact on their swimming.
Yeah, I'd add on to the end of that I never got overly far as a swimmer. I got to districts and stopped there. But at the same point, I went training every day. I learned life skills that have set me up now, got me through 2 university degrees. I'm doing my final bit of qualifying now. Without swimming, I wouldn't have had those life skills. So it's not all about that performance, the time within the sport. It's also, I look back now, and 10 years ago, I was in 16-year-old swimming every day, and without that portion of my life, there is no way I'd be where I am now at all.
Yeah, there's so many branches, isn't there? So many branches.
Exactly. So like Kev said, it's looking at the swimmer as a person rather than the time on a sheet, essentially.
I'll tell one story to bring it all to a close. That's my favorite swimming story. So back in America, in the college system back in the 1930s, quite a while ago now, very talented swimmer, and moved into this club program within the university, and the coach was like, you could be so much better than what you are. And they were doing all the training they were supposed to be doing, but their head just wasn't that focused, if you like, specifically around performance swimming. So they didn't get to the standard that actually perhaps a parent or a coach would look at them and go, you could be so much better, and almost forcing them out of the sport, because they're like, I'm not bothered, I'm just enjoying what I'm doing. That swimmer then years later went on during World War II to save all of his boatmen, if you like, when their boat got hit by a torpedo during the war. They've made a film about it, and he then went on to become US president, and it was JFK that sent the people to the moon. So it's like, ultimately, we're all going to go on and do stuff, and the process of going through swimming is going to have some massive highs, some massive lows, and plenty of learning opportunities. And the outcomes you have are going to shape the rest of your life, regardless of how many medals you get, how many rankings you get, how many selections you get, and all those sorts of things. And, you know, we're all swimming people here, and everyone I work with in Adam's team, we're all swimming people. And we actually look back and go, we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for swimming. So understanding that perhaps some of the things that you can't measure on a scoreboard are the most important things. And that's for me, like, why we swim.
There you go. Perfect end.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everyone who's tuned into this live stream and contributed questions beforehand, or whether it's been live. We've really enjoyed going through them. I think if this is something that you guys want to see more of in the future, leave us a comment after this is done in the YouTube video, or drop us a message on social media. And we might look to do this kind of on a monthly occurrence with maybe specific topics in mind, whether it's training, racing, coaching, nutrition. Yep. We'll get special guests on, and we can basically interact with parents and support them a little bit more, and give some resources out there for you all to use.
It is. It's all about community, isn't it? Building a community. We're all after the same sort of common goal, which is to help out swimmers of different ages, of course. But they all have different goals in terms of targets, whether it's Olympics or nationals, districts, counties, whatever it is, fitness maybe. But we're all here for the same common goal. So this is the reason why we've done it. And thank you very much, everyone, with your comments before and after, like Scott said. And actually, I'm looking forward to doing this maybe, every month or so. That'd be quite good.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the invite, gents. Really enjoyed it. And again, thank you to everyone for the questions, because it's really important we are sharing these sorts of things, and what you guys are doing is absolutely awesome. So thank you for the invite.
Brilliant. Kev, best of luck at Arena League. And we will be back next week with more videos on our YouTube channel and podcast. But until then, everyone have a nice weekend, and we will speak to you all very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Catch you later.
Bye-bye.